Hello, my name is Caroline Hawley, and I would like to take you on a brief tour of my literature map on the research question of whether intercultural competence can be learned online. So we start out with what is intercultural competence, and so far I'm liking Fantini's definition, which is that it is a complex of abilities needed to perform effectively and appropriately when interacting with others who are linguistically and culturally different from oneself. The theory that underpins intercultural competence comes largely from behavioralists. And then we go to, can intercultural competence be learned online? So traditionally, intercultural learning takes place in a face-to-face setting, ideally in an actual, through an intercultural exchange. But now with Web 2.0 tools and the increasing emphasis of online learning, there are now the possibilities of having intercultural learning experiences in online settings. So I'm curious to know what is actually happening in those exchanges. And I found Nananka's explanation or understanding of how intercultural learning takes place as a dialogue between the tacit and explicit knowledge. And so that leads me to the question of whether tacit learning is possible in an online setting, and if so, how does that happen? Then finally, I'd like to look at what online instructional strategies and technological platforms are best for teaching intercultural competence. So far there's work in the experiential learning online and peer-to-peer learning, which is what I personally am participating in with the SUNY's COIL program, Collaborative Online International Learning. What I've found so far is that social media tools that enable one-to-one discussion have been effective. Asynchronous sessions, video sharing, and also storytelling are all tools that have been used effectively for intercultural learning. The question then also that I still need to define is some of these studies that demonstrate the usefulness of these tools are aiming at different learning objectives, and they may or may not be intercultural competence and or an aspect of intercultural competence. So that's something I need to narrow down and be very precise about. Lots of learning theory underpinning this area, connectivism, several references to community of inquiry, cognitive behavioral, situated learning, experiential learning are all coming up in my research so far. In terms of methodologies, we're finding a mixture of quantitative and qualitative approaches. A number of qualitative approaches use surveys of students and instructors, and these are some of the sort of inventories that have been used to measure intercultural learning and cultural competence. And then there's qualitative studies. One that I found interesting was by Wu and Merrick, and they did a smaller sample size, and because of that, they felt the qualitative approach was more useful and offered richer insight than what they could do with a quantitative approach. And when they did that, they looked at things like instructor and student journals, dialogues taking place on social networks such as Facebook, So my takeaway is that I actually think both quantitative and a qualitative approach would be useful and interesting and offer insight into the question of whether intercultural competence can be learned online. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.